because I noticed a concerted effort to shame America and what it means to be American. One American podcast reinforces the values and ideals of America by having conversations with key influencers from all over the world who resonate with the values embodied by Americanism. If you believe in things like the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and want to be part of the conversation with others who do too, then you're in the right place. So before we get into this episode, I'm asking you today, as one American, to tap the like button below and subscribe to the channel. This engagement really helps these conversations reach as many viewers as possible. Make sure to comment "I subscribed" below, and I'll do my best to respond to each and every comment. My name is Chase Geiser, and I am one American. Hey, it's the One American Podcast. I'm so glad and honored to have these great guests on the show today. Today, we're going to be talking about socialism in America and what they've been working on. So I'll let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell me about your new project.
Hey, Chase. I'm Jack Thomas Smith, and I am the executive producer and director of Socialism in America. And I'll send it over to Mandy.
I'm Mandy Del Rio. I'm one of the executive producers on Socialism in America.
And so to tell you a little bit about the project, basically what this documentary is, we were contracted by Newsmax, and it was to kind of show the rise of socialism in America. And we wanted to not only show how it's rising here in America, but we also wanted to kind of put it into historical context. So what we did in this documentary was we had three guests, James Carafano, Stephen Moore, who was a economist for President Trump, and Jessie Jane Duff. They were kind of our historians, economists, to kind of lay out the history of socialism, going back from the Industrial Revolution, Karl Marx, the Russian revolutions in 1917, China, Cuba, Venezuela. So we kind of give the whole historical perspective of how it rose in those countries and the similarities of how it's rising here. And in addition to that, we also have four guests, one from the former Soviet Union, one from China, one from Cuba, one from Venezuela, and they share their personal stories of living under socialism/communism. So we just wanted to be, we wanted to be as historically factual as possible with this. But, we also, if the lefties out there want to start accusing us of right-wing propaganda, it's fine. Try and discredit this. I stand by all the facts of our documentary, the historical facts. But then we also wanted to have the guests who actually lived under it to bring their personal experiences, because, again, you want to attack us, by all means, why don't you sit down and talk to them? They actually lived under it. They're not, American socialists, whatever that is.
Sure. So I've noticed that in America, there seems to be an emphasis on sort of society as a whole and the collective, and a lack of emphasis, as there sort of traditionally has been, on the individual and individual rights and what the individual can accomplish. Is this sort of a common thread throughout all these other nations and historically that you've looked at in terms of how socialism came to the forefront? Or is America unique in that we actually used to have a very heavy cultural emphasis and consensus on the individual?
I mean, socialism completely annihilates individualism. And as far as I think it is becoming where you're not allowed to be an individual. That's what we're seeing with the cancel culture. And, when you look back at all the socialist and the communist countries, that's one thing they get rid of is your individuality. They want you to be one. Everybody thinks the same. Everybody looks the same. And we're seeing that from a certain faction of our country, that they're trying to completely eliminate, different ideas of thought. They're rewriting history. But basically your individuality, it doesn't exist under socialism. And when we are seeing that with people, you just go on Twitter and you have a different opinion than a certain side, and they want to shut you down. They want to shout you down. So we're definitely seeing the parallels of, the socialist countries that we definitely researched and talked to people from, and hear what's happening here now.
So how long did it take to put this project together?
It actually came together pretty quick. God, what were the dates on it? I think it was the end of March of this year. We signed with Newsmax to do this. So essentially, the way the whole process worked, this was a case where I came up with the concept. I pitched it to them, and they actually greenlit it, which was awesome. So I wrote the treatment for it, sent it over to them, they approved it. And then we jumped right in on it. Mandy found our four guests from the various countries, and they're home runs. I mean, they're amazing. And the stories, the personal stories that they shared. I mean, it's religious persecution, hunger, censorship. It's for one example, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but
That's fine. The show's for tangents.
Good. Then I'm not. So our one guest, Helen Raleigh, she's from China. She said that as a child, they would only allow her 3 pounds of rice a month, to eat. And so it's this whole constant theme of control and you conform and censorship and state-run media and all that. But anyway, I'll go back to the original question. So we started shooting in March, and then we delivered this sometime in July, I would say. We completed it in July. Then it had to go through all the QCing and all that, and it premiered last Sunday night and last night as well. So the process.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It was about a 3 to 4 month process, which for a documentary like this, where we're essentially doing 200 years worth of history,
about 260 if you're including the
industrial revolution. In a 43-minute documentary. I mean, that kind of turnaround with the interviews and with all the historical footage that Mandy found, it was a huge project, and we're very proud of it.
That's awesome. So why is it, do you think, that given that basically if you talk to anybody from a socialist country who's actually experienced what socialism is like, their response is overwhelmingly negative, but yet we still see pushes domestically for these policies that lead to these outcomes?
Right. And I don't even know. I think a lot of it is it's that old saying, those who don't know their history are bound to repeat it. I know that's not the actual saying. I totally massacred that. But
it's okay.
I think that's part of it, is that people either don't know, or they forget, or they think they're going to do it different. And we've heard that a lot. No one's done socialism correctly. No one's done communism correctly. I've heard that even. So everyone thinks they have the way of doing it, where everybody's equal, but that's not realistic. And there's a reason it hasn't worked out, is because it won't work out. Like, that is not the system, that it's not made to work out. So
yeah, and if you don't mind, if I can expand on that, I mean, sure. The people who have lived under it, who are against it, I mean, the answer is obvious. They actually lived under it.
Right.
They actually lived under it, and they don't ever want to live under it again. And the people here that are pushing for it have never lived under it. So, it's amazing. And that's kind of, Chase, that's what we were trying to do with this documentary. And that's why we wanted to show the history of it, because it's so important to lay out the history, because apparently the people here who that do want it, they don't know the history, because if they did know the history, they wouldn't want it. And Steve Moore actually says it in the documentary. He says, I want anyone here who wants this to go live in Venezuela, and they will come back here and kiss the ground when they come back.
Mm-hmm.
And and then we kind of take our shots at Bernie Sanders in this, and AOC and Tlaib and the Squad, and we also don't hold back on Che Guevara either. It's amazing how so many people here, because of one picture, right?
Yep.
One picture of Che Guevara, he's a rock star.
Right.
Okay, the guy was a homophobe, he was a racist, he was a murderer. Our one guest from Cuba, he said in the interview, which unfortunately it didn't make the final cut, but he said, Che Guevara would just sit up on a wall and sit there and smoke cigars while the firing squads just mowed people down. So, but this guy's a rock star. He's a hero to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's interesting about that particular story to me is that I can't imagine a situation in which any mentally healthy human being would do that, right? So let's just take, for example, the most obvious instance of evil throughout history, throughout the 20th century, right, which is the Holocaust, right? And there were the Nuremberg trials, and a lot of those guys were convicted of the war crimes and prosecuted accordingly. And can you imagine if General Patton would have sat on a wall and smoked a cigar and watched the firing squads? I mean, that's just totally inappropriate, right? So even if Che Guevara was totally just in these prosecutions, which I'm not saying that he was by any means, but even if these people really needed to be shot by firing squad, the fact that he would just sit there and watch and smoke a cigar is really sick.
It's sick. And people wearing them on t-shirts and Rage Against the Machine.
It is a great picture.
Yeah, I mean.
And don't forget Motorcycle Diaries. Okay, the beautiful art house film about Che Guevara.
It was a beautiful film. It was, as a film, a beautiful film. But imagine if they did that about Hitler. I mean, imagine. I mean, he was a horrible human being. Yet they did this artistic, gorgeous film about, he was so poetic and so deep and helped the lepers and yada yada yada. Mm-hmm. But it's like, guys, let's come back to earth now. Let's come back to reality.
Well, here's an idea for a film. Okay, so it's about a young man who just came back from World War I, and he's going around the countryside painting. His whole dream in life now is to become a painter, and we'll call it the countryside painter. Okay, I mean, it's Hitler, guys. It's like this is how ridiculous this is.
These people are sick in the head.
It's mental illness. It's they don't know their history, and so on our end, we can't help their mental illness, but by doing this documentary, we can maybe help them understand history a little bit.
So did you notice a common thread in terms of how socialism manifests, in that the intentions are laid out and branded in the beginning as very noble, right? So is there a motif of, hey, we're going to help the poor? There's been a tremendous amount of corruption. The people have been stolen from by the establishment as it is, and so in order to attain justice, we have to overthrow the establishment and just sort of create like a new order. That's sort of how it starts, right? And everybody kind of wants to get on board with overthrowing the current form of corruption, but if it's just going to be replaced by another form of corruption that's even worse, then the whole point is sort of moot.
Exactly. It's so true. It's funny. My mother taught me a very valuable lesson when I was a little kid about communism. She just showed my brother and I the cartoon of Animal Farm, and and kind of set it up like, here's what's going to happen in the movie. And she said, on paper, communism sounds like a good idea. On paper, everybody's equal. Everybody should be treated like equals, and everybody should be able to, just live and walk the earth, and be happy. And she said, well, let me just, you guys got to watch this movie. And the problem with this is there will always be the pig named Napoleon, who basically always wants the power and will always rewrite the rules. And it just doesn't work. And I remember that lesson from when I was probably about 6 when she showed us that movie. But it's always the same. It is always the same theme of, and that's how they manipulate people. They want everybody. How great does that sound that we all, imagine? Imagine. There's no borders and no money, and we just trade and we live this happy life. Well, there's something to be said about people being weak. When they're
Mm.
all on the bottom, everybody is literally on the bottom, and there's always going to be somebody on top. And we've just seen that there's an abuse of power every single time. It just doesn't work. There's always going to be greed, and it's awful, but it's the truth. There's always going to be people abusing power.
So when you looked into Karl Marx, I have mixed feelings about Karl Marx, and I'm not as educated on him as I ought to be. I've read Capital and I've read the Communist Manifesto, but it seems to me that we have a situation where we have a disgruntled, brilliant mind who wrote about the ails of the time and offered a very, very hypothetical solution, right? Which he never really saw play out himself. And people always go back to Marx. And I don't think that anybody would really make the claim that Marx was an evil person. It seems like what he wrote and his ideas were used as a weapon by evil people to attain massive amounts of power. So what are your thoughts on Karl Marx himself and his actual criticisms on the contemporary society at the time? Because there were issues of exploitation and labor at the time, right? And it seems like communism is just an overcorrection, right?
Of course. And isn't that the way it goes with everything? I mean, it's almost like, you could say the Quran, the radical Islamic terrorists, how, they take this passage and they completely twist it around to suit their psychotic vision of how the world should be. And, you can't blame Karl Marx for everything that happened in the 20th century. It's basically people's interpretation and how they use this to suit their own needs. And you look at Karl Marx, he basically, he wrote this book. I mean, it's pretty much all he did.
And he was financed
and it was
Frederick
Engels.
So I don't know how Karl Marx got all the credit for Marxism when Frederick Engels was kind of like backing him financially. And to me, it just seemed like, Karl Marx didn't want to work very hard from what we've learned. And
he was a raging alcoholic. That's pretty well documented.
Well, that's it. And like I said, Frederick Engels was kind of the money behind him, and it's definitely easy when you're spending other people's money to say how unfair it is to work so hard, and not get your dues. But also, I think you're right in that he had the idea that he was more about the workers, but then he laid the groundwork for somebody saying, well, Marx, his way isn't enough. The people, leaving it up to the idiotic people and the workers, that's not doing anything. That's not doing it right. And then steps in, Lenin, who basically, said, no, we need to, the people we can't rely on to spread the message. We have to actually hire revolutionaries. We have to have professional revolutionaries going out there. And then the message is like, well, who are you doing this for? Are you doing this for the working people? Or are you doing it for yourselves? The upper crust. So, and the educated. So I agree with you that I'm not sure if Marx's, I think his ideas were a little bit more pure, but he still was kind of a mooch.
Right. And isn't that ironic that he was getting paid to write this? It's like,
right. But you guys got paid to do your documentary, so I'm just teasing.
Right. Which isn't it great? God bless America.
Right. And I'm just teasing. But another point that I want to make too is that it seems to me that one of the beauties of America and why it's worked at least up until this point as well as it has is that we sort of, though we have a centralized government, we sort of have like a very decentralized principle. And what I mean is if the government's emphasis is on protecting freedoms rather than managing means of production, then really there's no one that says how things should be done. There's just liberty within a system, and then individuals create businesses and things change sort of in an unpredictable and spontaneous, productive way. But then when you have like a hyper socialist or a hyper communist system, it requires a lot of top down management. And so the success of that system is hyper dependent on whoever is running it, right? So you have a very different China when Mao is running it between 58 and 62 as you do today, right? When it's President Xi. And so one of the beauties of America as it was designed is the founders knew that there were going to be corrupt or foolish people running the helm throughout history at some point as it played out. And the system was designed to withstand that, right? It's sort of like McDonald's. You get a Big Mac anywhere, as bad as it tastes the same at every McDonald's you go to, right? Because the system is pure. And so is that something that you sort of saw with this sort of, as you were putting together this documentary, is that this top-down management was really dependent on how it played out was really dependent on who was running it?
I mean, yes. The problem was that in the 20th century, these guys were all the same. I mean, it was, even though they did it differently, it would, the end result was still the same. Does that make sense? It's you look at Mao, you look at Stalin, you look at Castro, and then Chavez, in Venezuela. I mean, obviously he was nowhere near as bad as those guys.
Right.
But it's kind of like yes and no. It was like they were all bad, but they were bad in different ways, if that makes sense.
Well, they were all trying to do it differently too, I think. They were all, it was kind of everyone influenced somebody else, and they said, well, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it this way that works. And, it's funny that you brought up our founding fathers, because every day I'm like, thank God
I know.
we had that protection in our country. And we learned that from the American Revolutionary War. That's why, we can't have soldiers come and invade our homes, and
right.
That's
No
why,
quarter.
I mean, so many of the Bill of Rights was written because we learned from, the Revolutionary War. So.
Yeah, how smart were those guys, right? Oh my God.
They were smart, but the funny thing is if you don't get something absolutely perfect, even a small weakness plays out in a big way down the road, right? It's like just being a little bit off at the tee, right? And by the time the ball gets to the green, it's way off. And so I hope that there aren't too many vulnerabilities in the system that they set in place for us to, correct some of these issues that we're facing. And that kind of brings me into the next thing I wanted to talk about was, okay, so we've kind of talked about socialism versus capitalism, or freedom versus collectivism. And how are you seeing socialism manifest in the United States, or how has it been manifesting in the United States, say, since the Industrial Revolution or 1913 or FDR, whatever you want to, whichever one you want to pick? Sort of different people argue different starting points.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, you have all the social programs. And, I know with the New Deal, obviously, you look at the Great Depression, things happen for a reason, and it's easy for us living now, where you look back at that time period and you say, oh, they should have never started this. But you know what? If you were one of those guys that was living in Tent City, you would have wanted the government to step in and help.
Even before that, Eugene Debs, one of the earliest, probably, what was he the first socialist in this country that we know of?
Probably
Eugene Debs. And I think, with the need of unions and protecting people's working rights and making sure children weren't working in factories and getting their ears cut off or frozen off, like in the jungle. But I mean, that really happened. It wasn't just in a book. But my point is, I think that I think some of these people were doing it for the right reasons, to protect the working class, because it was bad here for people during the Industrial Revolution. And so I think with the rise of somebody like Eugene Debs, just wanting to be there for the workers and the working class. But it's the fine line between protection and corruption, which
and it's also the different levels too. It's like with FDR, it was a bad time. I mean, that was one of those where
desperate times call for desperate measures type thing.
Yeah, people needed help. But then you flash forward to the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. That's a whole different animal. And to me, and we cover that in Socialism in America, that really, if you really see what's going on in this country right now, a lot of its roots are back to the 1960s. And it has to do, you have the Great Society, you have, the radicals on the left, the protesters that essentially infiltrated the media and the education system. And, and here we are decades later, where so many people have been influenced by these radicals from the 1960s. They play the long game, man. I mean, that's the whole thing. They're looking at it like, I mean, you see it, you see it with the open border, you see it with the indoctrination in our schools. It's, they're looking at it like, all right, we might not have that vote right this second, but 20 years down the road, we'll get that vote, 40 years down the road. And that's kind of how socialism/communism works. It's always the long game.
And it creeps from within
Yep.
as well. We're seeing things happen like the mandates in California, and what's happening. Well, California in general is just like a socialist, communist utopia in a weird way. It's so bad, and I'm from there, so it really pains me to say that.
I lived there for 3 years. Yeah, I know.
Oh, did you? What part? Where were you?
I lived in Orange County, Laguna Niguel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was up in Northern California, the Bay Area.
It's beautiful.
I know, isn't it? What a shame what's happening there. I mean, when you
just imagine how pretty California is, and the opposite is how good the politics are.
Exactly. I mean,
it's a great way to put it.
I haven't been back for 10 years. When I was in 10 years, that place, my family out there is like, you won't recognize it. It's not the same.
I know, it's a shame.
It's horrible. I mean, and think about how twisted this is. So criminals got a pay raise, pretty much. They were able to
the politicians.
I know. Yeah, I know. Oh my God. I know. Well, no, I mean, like real, well, they're criminals too, but like people they were able to steal up to $400 without it being like a crime. Right. They just got a pay raise to $950. And no one's really enforcing it. We've all seen the video. We've all, read the stories about how, you can just it's a free for all. But they're mandating this vaccine that's not even oh my gosh, they're mandating that for children. Sure. So basically, forcing a vaccine, but criminals got a pay raise. So that's just one example of how bad California is. But then you're also seeing things like socialism creeps in through, I don't know, like the COVID bill, like where they're, it's supposed to be about helping Americans through a global pandemic, which is really bad. Like, I mean, we were hit with a serious disease. Right. But then, and people were out of work, and then you're seeing, a COVID bill. And somehow there's money allotted for, I think, transgender studies. What was it, in Pakistan?
Yes, in Pakistan. Yeah, only 20% of it actually goes to COVID-related stuff. The other 80% is just baloney.
There you go.
Yeah.
So what is that? That to me is how it creeps in. That's like so obvious.
Right. Well, one of the things that's really concerning to me about how socialism seems to have played out historically, and you by all means are both more expert on this than I am, this is just sort of my layman armchair assessment, is that the more desperate people are, the easier it is to implement these policies.
Yes.
And it seems to me that in the United States, there is incentive for socialists to catalyze the desperation of a people in order to manifest the policies, right? So the poorer people become, the greater the wealth gap between the rich and the poor, the more we inflate the dollar, for example, through these programs. It's sort of like a downward spiral, because the programs create the problems the programs are branded as solving. So the more we create these programs, the bigger the problem gets, the easier it gets to make more programs, right? And so have you seen that as something that's sort of played out too? Like, is it much easier in desperate societies to sort of change the system to a socialist paradigm?
Oh, of course. But here's the thing, real quick point. Poor here is not poor, somewhere. I mean, like Venezuela and that, or North Korea. Okay. I mean, like that's something that we have to really stress. Okay. You know, poor here, you can still get free housing. You can get free phones. You can, you have a heated home. It's, you have food, the ability to get, food through the government, that type of thing. So poor here is not poor anywhere else. But yes, your point is spot on. they take full advantage of bad situations. That's what Castro did in Cuba. So you had the Batista regime, which was horrible. I mean, the guy was basically a dictator. So Castro came in with all the false promises that, we're going to become this free elections, this wonderful society. He was able to get people to rally behind him. So, he takes over from Batista. First thing he does is, no, there's no elections. I mean, and that's the stuff that they do. They rewrite constitutions. It's all false promises. And that's how they rally people behind them and get to power. Now, with that being said, I truly feel sorry for the people of the 20th century, especially in the Soviet Union, where they had no idea what this new concept was. Okay. I feel bad for those people. But present day, we have 100 years of history to show what this leads to and what happens. And that's where I get angry and that's where I get frustrated, because there is over 100 years of history to show false promises. What happens when they come into power? You trade one dictator for another. And again, going back to my original point about how poor here is not poor in North Korea.
Sure.
So a lot of these problems are embellished. A lot of these are exaggerated, and it's all this, it's horrible, 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 because it's a way for these leaders to manipulate people, to brainwash people, divide the country as a whole in order for them to get into power.
Sure. Well, and we see a little bit of that, and I don't want to get too controversial, but we see a little bit of that with the COVID stuff, right? Where you see constant reporting on how there's the capacity in the hospitals is an issue, and they make it sound like it's because everybody's sick, but maybe it's because a lot of the nurses quit because they were mandated to get vaccinated and they didn't want to, right? So how are we supposed to know what the real cause of the problem is? And so they create this fear because they're not specific, or they manipulate statistics in order to sort of plug a narrative. They create this fear, and then the people respond based on emotion rather than reason.
Yep, 100%. And that's a way to control people. It's divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And there, I think it's beyond me how Americans would rather blame other Americans for not getting a vaccine instead of where it came from, the virus came from. So, and I don't want to get too if you don't want to, but I find that that's such an obvious tactic.
Yeah, it came from China. I mean, it came from China, but somehow this became President Trump's fault.
Well, it's a way to pit people against each other, though, because now it's like, you're dying. Your grandma's dying because she got the vaccine, and so the anti-vaxxers, which I literally haven't met one person who's really anti-vax who doesn't want to take the anti-vax is totally different, but they're blaming, they're saying you're dying because they don't want to get the vaccine, and it's making people mad, and it's making people lash out at people that don't trust the vaccine, and that's an obvious tactic of dividing people.
So a lot of people talk about Hitler as being on the right, but at the same token, the party was the National Socialist Party.
Right.
So my question for you is, as you were doing your research for this documentary, regardless of whether it actually got into the final product, what did you learn about Hitler and sort of the left-right spectrum, and why was he so antagonistic toward communists? Because he was explicitly against the Communist Party of Germany.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, you don't have to hate one or the other. I mean, he hated capitalism and he hated communism. I mean, Hitler was a nut. I mean, he was nuts.
Look at his mustache and his hair.
So unfortunately, it didn't make it. Because if we would have dove into World War II, I mean,
it would have been a 3-hour doc. Yeah,
it could have been a 3-week doc. I mean, when you start diving into all the aspects of that. But yeah, he was a socialist. I mean, that's what they were. I mean, he only only allowed capitalism because he needed it in order to fund the war machine. Okay.
Hmm.
So, but again, he was against communism. He was against capitalism. The guy was just a nut,
He was
you
nuts
know.
against
He
religion.
was, yeah. I mean, the guy was nuts. And this whole thing with claiming that he's a right winger and everything.
I'm
How?
seeing the parallels of I'm sorry, leftists, honestly, in that.
Sure.
Fascism, it's funny because they'll throw a Google, and you say, this silencing the opposition is a fascist. That's what fascists do. They
Sure.
silence the
Sure.
opposition. Um,
Absolutely.
I've had people throw up a Google explanation. Oh no, this is fascism, and it's a right-wing authoritarian, belief system. And it's like, how is that right-wing when you're doing the same thing? I mean, you're disrupting
Mm.
people's freedom of speech. You want to
Hmm.
get rid of all of religion. You don't, you want to crush people who are, claim to be, who are religious. I've seen it. We've all seen it. The parallels between the way that leftists act is, to me, the same way the fascists acted. It's like,
Right.
how is it that, I think both sides are. I think the right is kind of more onto the left. I think in the beginning, like when during the Trump rallies, when Trump was running against Hillary and Bernie, and we were seeing a lot of the Bernie Brown shirts, is what we
Right.
all called
Right.
them, disrupting Trump rallies, and people weren't really getting it at first. I don't think, like, wow,
Right.
this is bad. But then the right was getting privy to it, and we were getting more on guard. And I don't really advocate. I don't advocate silencing
No.
anyone's freedom of speech or rallies.
Sure.
Or I just you're an American. You got a right to say what you want to say, but so do I.
Right.
And that's
Right.
the problem. They're not respecting
Well,
it.
and I think it depends on what you mean by right wing, right? So a lot of people think like right wing is just like inherently traditionalist, right? So, okay, in that sense, I guess you could say Hitler was sort of right wing because he was all about traditional German values and traditional German culture. That was something that he sort of
Okay.
used in
Yeah.
order to gain his momentum. But if you're talking like right wing in like the American sense of right wing, which is just sort of like a Bill of Rights, general sense of patriotism, pro-capitalist, pro-small business right wing, that's a completely different thing. So I think that we often confuse what like European right wing is versus or what mid 20th century right wing is versus what
Right.
contemporary right wing is. So
Right.
just because you're a Republican doesn't mean that you're closer to Hitler than you are farther from him, right? It doesn't.
Yeah.
That's just a really oversimplification.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
but again, this is all about rewriting history now. And that's,
Right.
again, and this comes back to our documentary and the whole point of what we're talking about is what comes with this with leftism, communism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, it's always revisionist history. Okay.
Mhm.
The one that I love is, the Republicans are racist. The Republican Party, they're the party of racism, historical racism. And it's like, okay,
Right.
well, the Southern Democrats were the slave owners. Okay.
Sure.
Southern Democrats created the KKK, Jim Crow. Okay. And then they always talk party shift, party shift. Okay. Well, when did all these party
Right.
shifts happen? Because Woodrow Wilson was the one who implemented segregation in federal buildings. And that was, 1916, 1917, approximately. He
Mhm.
screamed birth of a nation at the White House. He was an open racist. Okay.
Mhm.
Right.
Then, you keep going forward with Franklin Roosevelt with Japanese internment camps. That was pretty racist. Okay.
Sure.
Keep moving forward. And then you had Bill Clinton signing the Defense of Marriage Act, which, prohibited same-sex marriages. So again, we're all homophobes. Okay. Everyone on the
Right.
right are homophobes.
Right.
So, and now our current president, he wrote the crime bill. Okay, which we all know what the
Mhm.
impact was of that on the African American community. So my point is that how did they somehow shift this? That the Republican Party is the party of historical racism, and the Democrats aren't. They're the freedom fighters, and they're the
Right.
ones that they were always about civil rights and
Right.
individual liberty and all that. And it just boggles my mind. And then I'll go actually one more point on that is that, let's say that is true, that there were these party shifts and all that. So that, that slave owner back in, the 1800s, he shifted and became a Republican, as they like to claim. So he's still alive and voting. You know, the racist cop in the 1960s who was a Southern Democrat and became a Republican. He's still, 50-year-old sheriff in a small town in Alabama. He's still alive and voting. It's all about revisionist history, and it's always about what serves the agenda.
That's really interesting. So what is the solution, given that there's not really anywhere to run?
That's the $1 million question. I mean, the solution on that is, God, we have to teach our kids. I mean, that's honestly what the solution is, everything that I just said to you, those are facts. I mean, those are historical facts, what I just said. But now I'll be called a racist for saying that. Okay. And apparently I don't understand party shifts and all that. So, I just laid it out to you, and I'll challenge anyone on that.
Sure.
But we have to teach our children our true history. And sometimes it's not pretty, I mean, slavery was horrible. It was wrong. Jim Crow was horrible. Okay. Japanese internment camps were horrible. I mean, no country is perfect, but are we the best country in the world? Yeah, because you know why? If there is something that's wrong, we deal with it. We try to correct it, and we try to give everyone, what did Steve Moore kept saying? Our country is not about equal outcome. It's equal opportunity. And that's what makes our country amazing. Yeah. So to answer your question, it's up to us. I mean, that's the whole point of a documentary like Socialism in America. It's laying out the historical perspective of what happened with socialism, how it infiltrates these countries with false promises, and we're going to replace this guy and everything's going to be better. It also gives the personal perspective of people that lived under it. That's the best thing we can do. I mean, we've got to fight this propaganda that's going on in the colleges and in the public school systems. And I guess my question in general to the people, like someone like Bernie Sanders or people that want to indoctrinate our youth, what is the end game? What is your end game here? If socialism/communism comes to this country, is that really what you want? Is that really the society that you want? And, Chase, it's funny, especially like in the movie business, you see so many people in Hollywood that, I'm for Bernie, I'm for socialism. If that truly happens, the entertainment industry is going to shut down, because if all of them
be state sponsored.
Right. Right. I mean, there were so many great
It's like The
movies.
Lives of Others, like great movie.
I mean,
you remember that movie?
Great movies that came out of the Soviet Union, But my point is that, what drives Hollywood is capitalism. It's investment. You have hedge funds financing these movies. And if all this money is getting gobbled up by the government.
Well, it's also, do you want the government to tell you how to make a movie?
Sure.
Because I don't.
Which they kind of already do, because the award ceremony has gotten so virtue signaling.
You're totally spot on with that. Now there's a checklist basically to make a TV show on Netflix on,
Right. What percentage of your cast or crew is X minority or
It's horrible.
Well, imagine, I mean, is that what really people want? Is that what people want? I mean, I
heard that they're eliminating blind auditions from like the New York Symphony or something. Did you hear that?
That I don't know. Yeah, but
so apparently up until now they've done blind auditions, so they just listen, and whoever sounds the best gets the job. They can't even tell that they're white or black or Asian or whatever, and they're trying to eliminate that. So I hear, this is just a rumor that I've heard, they're trying to eliminate that in order to make sure that there's equity of outcome in terms of racial representation.
How about just
you're
talent?
Going to lose so many people doing this. You're going to miss out on so many talents.
And I don't think and I want to be clear, nobody's saying that we shouldn't find ways to improve the opportunities for minority communities, right?
No,
Nobody's saying that minorities are never going to be as good at the violin as white people. Nobody's actually making these explicitly racist claims. Nobody really believes that. I mean, there's a small group of people that believe that, but nobody listens to those guys.
Sure.
They're just jerks, okay? But it's so we're not saying that we shouldn't figure out ways to fix the public school system, or give families resources in order to be able to spend more time with their kids or whatever to prevent crime. Nobody is against any of these types of programs. I think the issue is when we do this sort of affirmative action, and then you get on an airplane and there's like a minority female pilot, and you wonder, is that person the pilot because they're awesome at being a pilot, or are they flying this plane because there needed to be a quota met, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so it's scary.
It's actually more racist.
Yeah.
It's actually more racist. You're treating people like they can't do anything on their own merit.
Right.
So you're supposed to just be color and not talent or skill. I mean, they want me to see a person as just their skin color first, and treat them like they're lower than me. So I got to give them an opportunity. Who the heck am I to do that? Why would I don't understand these liberals and especially I just don't. I'm sorry, but white liberals, to me, that's pretty racist. If you think that these people need your touch, minorities need you to lift them up, that's not right.
That is the racism. Yeah.
That is.
So
I'll tell you this real quick. Our editor
Sure, take your time.
Socialism in America, Carl George, he's African American. I hired him because he's good. That's simple.
Right.
I mean, I don't care.
I'm not going to see people for just their skin color, and I don't care.
Yeah, he's good. Good editor. That's it. That's it. I couldn't care less what his race, religion. I don't care. Just good. Why is that so hard to do? I mean, that's all we have to do is just judge people. Look, I live by Martin Luther King. Judge a man by the content of his character and not the color of his skin. That's how I live my life.
Exactly.
Yep, straight from the speech. So where can people find your documentary? I know it's airing this week. I want to hear dates and times. So where can they find it after it airs to restream?
Go ahead, you can take that.
Okay, so it's airing again tomorrow, Tuesday morning at 5 a.m.
It's October 5th at 5 a.m. Okay.
Yeah, October 5th. And then it's airing again Friday, October 8th, again at 5 a.m. So DVRs can be set. I know that's early. And that's 5 a.m. Eastern, by the way. And then we're hoping after that, a lot of times they do show our documentaries like randomly throughout like the month. So,
sure.
Newsmax.com would be a great place to check that out and see the schedule and see when it's going to air.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for both coming on. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm excited to watch your documentary, and keep up the great work that you guys are doing, and let me know if there's anything that I can do to be helpful.
Thanks,
Thank you
Chase.
so much.
Appreciate
Thanks for having us. This was great.
You're welcome.